For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one Metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
Good morning. It is October 5th, 2023. I will now call our Metro Council meeting to order for our business of the day. Connor, could you please call roll for attendance?
Yes, thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilor Simpson.
Present.
Councilor Nolan.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Deputy Council President Lewis.
Present. And Councilor Wong and President Peterson are excused traveling on Metro business. Before we begin our agenda item, could we please play the safety video?
I'm Micah Reese, and I'm the Dive Safety Officer here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here is diver safety. I'm out here at the Oregon Zoo, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of this building. In the event of fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside the entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to open public communication on non-agenda items. Connor, can you please describe for our participants today the procedure for public communication?
Yes, thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us in person, you can fill out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bring that up to me. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button, which, depending on your version of Zoom, is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. For those joining virtually, I'll promote you up to a full panelist, so I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept that promotion. Once you do, you'll rejoin and be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And as a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, Deputy Council President Lewis, councilors, we have not had anybody sign up in advance to speak today. And I'll just wait another second for any hands to go up in our virtual or physical audience. And seeing none, Deputy Council President Lewis.
Okay, I'm going to close public communication for the day, and I'm going to move us to presentations. First on our agenda is Indigenous Peoples Day, and we have with us our Government Affairs and Policy Development Coordinator, Ashley Schofield, who is going to present for us.
You're good. It's unmuted.
It's on, okay. Thank you. Good morning, councilors. Thank you again for the time on the agenda today. My name is Ashley Schofield. I'm the coordinator for Government Affairs and Policy Development Team, also known as GAPD, here in Metro. Today I'm honored to present on behalf of Metro's Tribal Affairs team and our Indigenous-led staff planning committee, who have been working to create a season of learning, reflection, and where appropriate, celebration opportunities at Metro, including acknowledgement of the National Day of Remembrance for U.S. Indian boarding school survivors that was presented by Katie McDonald last week, sharing staff learning opportunities for Indigenous Peoples Day this upcoming Monday, and more learning opportunities for the upcoming Native American Heritage Month in November. A few of my colleagues from the Planning Committee couldn't be here today as they are currently in Grand Ronde at the History and Culture Summit, and so they could not be here today. So I have the honor of presenting to you. So today we are using this presentation in front of the council to remind us of the importance of observing Indigenous Peoples Day. The observation of Indigenous Peoples Day helps us counter false historical narratives embedded within the celebration of Columbus Day, such as Columbus discovering America, Indigenous Peoples Day, Indigenous peoples welcoming explorers, and explorers treating Indigenous people with respect. By shifting away from the celebration of Columbus Day, the celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day recenters Indigenous perspectives and ultimately allows people to gain a perspective of understanding of Indigenous resistance and resilience in the face of colonization. Celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day gives non-Native individuals exposure to contemporary representation of Native communities and people, while providing non-Native Americans more opportunities to see how Native people have and continue to contribute to mainstream. The observation of Indigenous Peoples Day has the power to shift perceptions of Native communities and people because it centers Indigenous perspectives while acknowledging the legacy of colonialism and honoring the histories, cultures, contributions, and resiliency of contemporary Native peoples. In addition to today's presentation, the Planning Committee will be sharing resources and information about publicly available events so staff can support and learn more from the Native community. We encourage anyone listening today to seek out events and learning opportunities near them this week or on Monday and for all the months in the year. Additionally, there will be Metro Together coming out on October 30th that will highlight the important work Indigenous staff in Parks and Nature are leading with Indigenous community members and tribes and their members to access the land, engage in gathering and other culturally important activities. As you may recall, last year, the Council approved resolution number 225286 for the purpose of proclaiming the second Monday of every October Indigenous Peoples Day in the greater Portland area. I would like to reread that proclamation out loud, if that is okay. Thank you. Whereas Indigenous tribes and bands have been in the lands that we inhabit today throughout Oregon and the Northwest since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of the region today. Whereas Metro would like to express our respect to the first peoples of this land. Whereas it is important that we recognize and honor the ongoing legal and spiritual relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to what we now call Oregon and the Northwest. And whereas we recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the federally recognized tribes who have ties to what is now known as Greater Portland, and thank them for continuing to share their traditional ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another and the land so it can take care of all of us. And whereas the interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated, the health of one is necessary for the health of all. And whereas the historical and contemporary contributions and innovations of Indigenous people to the arts, education, health, economic development, environmental stewardship, and civic community make the greater Portland area and Oregon a better place to live and work. And whereas it is important to never forget Oregon's and the United States history of violence, forced migration, thefts of land and resources, broken treaties, termination, relocation, and over-assimilated policies that we resolve to never repeat. And whereas the recognition and celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day transforms a celebration of colonialism, conquest, enslavement, and genocide into a commitment to emphasize and realize a new future through partnerships and celebrations to the enduring traditions, languages, governments, and history of the Indigenous people. Whereas on October 12th, 2020, Metro passed a resolution resolving that Metro shall recognize the second Monday of every October as Indigenous Peoples Day. Whereas Metro has the responsibility to oppose systemic racism and exclusion of Indigenous people in the greater Metro area through policies and practices that uphold tribal rights, ensure greater access and opportunity, and create educational opportunities for the public. And whereas Metro shall continue its efforts to partner with tribal sovereigns and Indigenous people to promote prosperity and well-being in our community through the implementing of our programs and activities within the context of honoring and respecting tribal rights, cultural heritage, and the pursuit of traditional life ways for present and future generations. Now therefore, be it resolved, Metro shall recognize every second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples' Day to honor and celebrate the many sacrifices and significant contributions made by tribes and Indigenous people throughout our vibrant community. And Metro recognizes all businesses, organizations, public institutions, and community members to recognize Indigenous Peoples' Day and to deepen their understanding of the history, culture, and significance of the Indigenous people and tribes of this land. That was adopted by Metro Council, 6th day of October 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us not only of our action, but through all those words of the importance of taking time to unlearn our history and learn the real history. Colleagues, anything other than a big thank you to staff for bringing this before us?
Yeah. I have a comment.
Yes.
I appreciate you bringing it to staff, and I just want to remind people that it isn't just Oregon and the Northwest. This extends all the way from Alaska, all the way to the Mapuche, and further, even further south to the Tierra del Fuegans, who are probably no longer existent. There's a network, most people don't realize there is a network of connections between these Indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. It's something that we recognize as Pan-American, and so it isn't just our local tribes. And when we had the symposium last week, it was very notable that the representative from Vancouver, Canada, also gave a recognition of native lands. So
Wonderful.
it's bigger than just here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have our Metro Auditor with us today, Brian Evans, and our presentation today is the annual report. Welcome, Auditor.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis and Metro Councilors. It's good to be here today to present the results of our annual report. If you've heard me describe this report in the past, it's really a way for us to kind of help the public and you as the council understand what we've achieved in the last year and what resources it took to achieve those accomplishments. The report demonstrates our values of accountability and transparency by reporting publicly about our performance and using that information to manage our work. It's also a way for us to show leadership and demonstrate how a system of performance measurement can be used in the public sector. Continuous improvement is a recurring theme in the audits that we provide to the council and to Metro management, and this is a report to apply that same lessons to our own work. Do you have a presentation, Connor?
Yeah, it should come up in just a moment here.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as a reminder for everybody at home, the auditor's office has three primary responsibilities. We conduct performance audits, we manage the contract for the annual financial audit, and we administer an accountability hotline where members of the public or employees can report concerns about Metro's programs and services. Next slide, please. So some accomplishments last year were that we 100% of the recommendations made 5 years ago were implemented by management, that feedback from audited programs exceeded the target for our quality, the amount of time it took to resolve reports to the accountability hotline decreased, and the office was fully staffed for the first time in several years. Next slide, please. So there's 5 performance measures that are included in the annual report. 2 of them are designed to measure our efficiency, and 3 are designed to measure our effectiveness. So I'm going to go through each of these, but the first 2 around efficiency are around our audit average hours, average audit hours, and the number of audits completed each year, the amount of audits completed per FTE, the total amount of audit hours spent by each department, audit feedback, and the percentage of audit recommendations implemented. Next slide, please. So looking at the first performance measure, as you can see, this is trending for 5 years. So the pink circles are the number of audits completed each year, and the green bars are the average hours per audit. So you can see that we completed 4 audits. They averaged about 2,000 hours total. And just a reminder that audits span a wide variety of topics and complexities. So some of them took about 1,000 hours, and the others, you know, the uppermost one took 3,300 hours. So quite a bit of range depending on the scope and complexity. Next slide, please. So these are the list of the audits released. These were all presented to Metro Council. So we did 3 full audits: surplus property, a look at Metro's intergovernmental agreements for the management of Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, and a look at the implementation of the 2019 Parks and Nature bond measure, and then 1 follow-up audit that looked at the progress made on recommendations in our Code of Ethics audit. Next slide, please. This is another look at our efficiency measures. So this is a look at the total hours or audits per FTE. My goal is to have 1.5 audits completed by each FTE, and we haven't met that goal in the last 3 years, actually the last 5 years to be candid, but we got close in FY 19-20. I'm really hoping that this year we'll improve some efficiency because we have a full audit staff and they'll have more experience under their belts, so there'll be less of a learning curve and we'll be able to complete things more timely, as well as taking on some topics that are not quite as broad and complex in scope, and so hopefully be able to turn those audits around more quickly. Next slide, please. So now pivoting to our look at more efficiency measures, and this is looking at kind of coverage, so how many audit hours are devoted to each department or venue in Metro, and I try to normalize that by the size of the department in terms of their expenditures. So you would expect the larger departments to get more attention because they're using more public resources, have more FTE, and smaller departments generally get fewer audit hours, but trying to normalize that by how big the departments are. This graph is always a little hard to interpret, but just for everybody at home, the pink dots on the right of the average line are departments that are relatively over-covered compared to the average. So they've received a little bit more audit attention in the last 5 years than some of the other departments. And then the green circles on the left of the average line are the departments that have relatively fewer audit hours. And so just for interpretation, Parks and Nature and WPES, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services, right there are the closest to the line. So they're the ones that were been the most aligned with their size and how many audits we've completed in those departments. It's pretty normal to think that there'd be uneven coverage every year. It's hard to cover every single topic every year, but this is one of the metrics that I look to see if we're making sure that we're spreading our audit resources equitably among the departments and venues. And just a note that we do have audits that will raise the number of audit hours related to WPES in the current fiscal year, and then some other topics that'll create some better balance. So it's always something that there's always misalignment, but we're kind of continually trying to make sure it's relatively small. Next slide, please. So another look at our effectiveness is getting feedback from auditees, so the folks that we audit. So after each audit, we send out a survey, anonymous survey, to get feedback on our staff, the report, the process, and the overall process. And this slide indicates that auditees feel like we have good quality work and they appreciate the way that we conduct our business. So I'm always happy to see that performance metric met. Next slide, please. The final and probably the most important effectiveness measure, because this is really about our overall effect on the agency, is looking at how many audit recommendations are fully implemented within 5 years. And so ideally, in an ideal trend, you would see gradual higher improvement or higher percentage implementation as you get farther away from the audit recommendations. And last year, audits made 5 years ago, 100% of the recommendations were implemented. So that's a great trend for us, really high performance, appreciate Metro management's willingness to implement those recommendations. Note of caution that next year, when I present this report, the performance might be slightly lower. That FY 18-19 recommendation, relatively low performance there in terms of 11% of the recommendations being implemented. That's really being driven by low implementation of recommendations related to emergency management and information security and technology. Next slide, please. So those achievements in our performance measures are also important to ground in kind of how many resources we use to conduct our work. And so this is a look at the 5-year trend of our expenditures adjusted for inflation. As you can see, most of our work is done by people. So the personnel budget is the vast majority of our expenditures. And it's, compared to last year, we're about 12% higher than we were in the previous year, and that's mostly because we finally have all the budgeted positions filled last year. Next slide, please. Pivoting to look ahead at what you can expect to see from us in the rest of this fiscal year. Reminder that we've presented 2 audits to Metro Council so far this fiscal year, one in June around Parks and Nature and the bond measure implementation. We'll be presenting the results of our solid waste transfer station operating controls audit to you later this month. That audit was published last month. And then we have a pretty full agenda for upcoming audits and that'll be completed in this fiscal year. So you can expect to see audit reports on the affordable housing bond implementation, supportive housing services implementation, coming out in November, and then we're starting some new audits, one looking at financial policies related to renewal and replacement, another audit looking at the span of control within Metro. That's an analysis of kind of the numbers of layers of management and the number of reports that report to each manager within the organization. We'll also be looking at the budget process and performance measures, capital project planning, and then we're doing our biannual look at financial condition of Metro that'll start in January. Next slide, please. Because we run an accountability hotline, state law says that we need to make some information available about what those reports, the volume of reports that came in and our kind of timeliness of how they were resolved. And so last year, there were 25 reports made to the hotline, which was slightly lower than the previous 2 years and a little bit lower than the average over the last 5 years. Of the 25 reports, 15 of them were successfully investigated. 10 didn't provide enough information to investigate, were out of Metro's jurisdiction, or the reporter later withdrew their concern. One of the investigative reports was substantiated. The other 14 were either found to be unfounded or there wasn't enough information provided to reach the information was inaccurate, and so we provided additional information to help the reporter understand what was going on. And corrective actions were made in response to one of the reports. Next slide, please. Then I also look and try to track the amount of time it takes to close reports. Best practices say that it's important when you manage a hotline to show that people can get a response and understand what's happening once they make a response. And so the hotline administrator or the hotline service provider provides benchmark data to know how many or what the average time it takes to resolve a report. So we use that 40-day target as kind of the benchmark to start with. Happy to see that in 4 or 5 years, Metro's met that mark. And just to note that the FY 2021 higher response was really because there was a number of reports made about the same issue, and that issue was fairly complex and took a lot of time to investigate. So it really took a lot of time, but it also shows responsiveness and I think thoroughness to be responsive to the reporter's concerns. And next slide, please. With that, I just want to thank my staff for all their work this year. It's been a year of transition as we've lost some experienced staff and gained some new fresh eyes to our work, and really appreciate all their efforts to get up to speed and kind of keep going. Really want to thank Metro Management for all of their work to implement recommendations, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful, thank you, Auditor. Colleagues, questions on the annual report? Counselor Rosenthal first.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. Thank you, Auditor Evans. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the hard work you and your staff do and the clarity of the audit performances that you do. I think it's very important that Metro does as many audits and is as clear about how they do that as possible. I just have a couple questions. The completion of audit responses, I assume that was dramatically affected by the COVID period when staff was sort of not here and communications were difficult. That's one question. And what was you said one of the audits took 3,300 hours, and what audit was that?
The audit was the Parks and Nature bond implementation.
Okay. And does that audit of the Parks and Nature bond implementation also include a general audit of, because Parks and Nature would be operating in addition to the bond, and that includes just the audit of also their operations in general that are not bond related?
That audit did not include a general look at the operations. It was really a look at what were the promises made to the voters in the ballot measure, and what are the indications that Metro's delivering on those promises. So really looking at, in that audit specifically, the promises made around equity and equitable access were kind of the focus of the bond measure, or one of the focuses of the bond measure. And so we were looking at, does Metro have a performance measurement system to help the public know if that intent, those values were being delivered?
Okay, thank you.
I might have missed your first question too. I don't know if
The first question was whether what impact the COVID period had on things, and on ability to get responses, ability to respond to the audit comments and stuff. It seems like it probably would have had a significant effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was disruption. I think everything that I've seen is it might have been different in terms of the way we were engaging or the way people were giving us feedback, but I think it was relatively the same amount of feedback, maybe slightly different because there was a very long transition period or just an adjustment period when people weren't sure if we should fully commit to a remote environment versus potentially to come back. Once that got cleared up, I think we had some good communication channels to kind of keep our work going. And in terms of responsiveness, implementation of the recommendations, you know, I guess I would leave that to management to talk about what their challenges have been, but I have seen some great responsiveness, especially as we've come out of the COVID and things start to stabilize and there's not so much disruption on a monthly or quarterly basis where you can focus on some of these longer term objectives.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Madam President. I don't have a question, Auditor Evans. I just want to acknowledge that the reason I don't have a question is that your office continuously produces clear, thorough reports, and this is one of those. So thanks for that effort, and thanks for making sure that our management both has the benefit of your perspective and that it's a collaboration, as noted with the responding department's rating of your services. Well done.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And the only question I have is, you report on the same metrics year over year. That's great. But sometimes we can miss the tone and texture of what keeps you up at night, what has you concerned. You're obviously a new office, both in literal space and also on almost all your employees. So with this newness, is there anything that we're missing in terms of narrative or texture of how you're doing your work that doesn't show up in these metrics?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for that. The auditors don't usually like to go off the top of their head, but I think I appreciate the opportunity to do it in this space when it's about our work. So I guess what I would comment on, trying to think about the agency has been really focused on equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and I think the last two budget cycles have had a fair amount of focus on equity performance measures and kind of what are we talking about here when we commit to that, and how would we know if we're meeting or exceeding expectations in that space. I think it's the same question we apply to our own work and frankly the audit community as well, wrestling with that question. And so you may hear me using the term efficiency, effectiveness, equity as well. In the past, historically, auditors have talked about effectiveness as kind of the bigger umbrella to talk about equity. I think a fair amount of us are talking about it more intentionally now, equity as a distinct categorization of effectiveness. So that's been one of the things that's kind of not reported in our report, in the annual report in terms of measures to track it, but some of the efforts that we've taken to kind of bake that into our process is really thinking about the topics we take on. And that is one of the ways that we really address the effectiveness question, that the values that this agency has put on that. So we've done a number of equity-related audits that are very specific equity, and then sometimes that have equity topics that are in a broader context. So I think that's something that maybe goes unsaid, but is something that's very important to us. And then I think we've also baked that perspective into our process where we're having an intentional conversation throughout the audit where we have an actual numbered form in the audit audit world, that's a very big deal to kind of commit to. We're gonna do this every audit, so that in our planning phase, we're kind of thinking through what are some equity considerations here as we get closer to trying to answer questions and narrow down the scope of our audits, thinking back on what we've already discussed and seeing what we've learned since that discussion and see if it's either more or less relevant to the topics that we take on. And so it's not something that comes up in the measures per se, but I think it's something that is an ongoing conversation and is really trying to be operationalized and not just talked about and then continued business as usual.
Okay, good, thank you. Colleagues, any additional questions? Well, seeing none, we will thank you, and we will look forward to this again next year. We'll see you between now and then with, I think, an audit in 3 weeks, something like that? Yeah.
I'll be back here in 2 weeks from
2
today, I
weeks.
think.
Yeah,
Yep,
we'll see you
thanks.
again then.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, so counselors, today we have first reading and public hearing of a set of ordinances. I'm going to bring us to item 4.1, which is ordinance 23-1498 for the purpose of amending certain Metro Code chapters in Title V Solid Waste for housekeeping updates and to incorporate plain language best practices. And with us, we have our senior Metro attorney, Shane Abma, who has been doing so much here, and I will let him explain this ordinance.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. Members of the council, for the record, my name is Shane Abma. I'm with the Office of Metro Attorney. I primarily advise the solid waste, IT, supportive housing services, and income tax divisions. And I'm here with you today to discuss 4 ordinances that involve updates to several code chapters. We're going to break this up into 2 parts. The first one is going to be Ordinance 23-1498, which deals with updates to Title V. And then we're going to move on to the other ordinances, which has its own slide presentation because they have a bit of a common theme to them. So with that, by the way, I'll say I know that not everyone gets as excited as I do about code updates, but I think this is the first time I've ever presented without a single person in the audience. Okay, so if you have, there you go, thanks. If you'll move on to the next slide, please. So we're here today on this first ordinance that, if adopted, it would update 2 solid waste code chapters with housekeeping changes. And those 2 chapters are the Solid Waste Facility Regulation chapter, which is 5.01, and the Solid Waste Flow Control chapter, which is 5.05. And I was here recently discussing Metro's Solid Waste Authority, and you might recall that our flow control, if that term is not familiar to you, is our authority to direct waste. Did you have a question, Councilor Rosenthal?
No, I was just.
We have a tech issue.
I have a tech issue.
Would you like me to continue?
Please, I can listen.
Next slide, please. As you may recall, in December of 2022, Metro Council adopted resolution number 22-5293, which I sometimes call the plain and inclusive language resolution. And that resolution requires plain and inclusive language best practices for the Metro Code as we draft our chapters. It also requires a scheduled review of Metro Code chapters on a regular basis for opportunities to update them. And it recognizes that certain regulatory code chapters, and this is primarily solid waste and income taxes, will require, and I'm quoting here from the resolution, frequent housekeeping updates to reflect changes in state law and ongoing regulatory clarity. And that's why we're here today. Next slide, please. For the last year, Metro staff, solid waste staff, have been compiling a list of things that they see that are incorrect in Metro Code solid waste chapters. And they do this yearly. As you may know, because it's a regulatory code chapter, unlike, say, maybe the zoo chapter, it's something that we consult frequently because we get questions all the time about, can you do something, is this allowed or not allowed? And as we're looking through the code, we sometimes find errors. And we find ways that we could write language a little bit cleaner. So that's what this is about. So let me give you a brief summary of the updates for these 2 code chapters. And these go into more detail in the staff reports, but this is just a high-level brief summary. For Chapter 5.01, if you could go back to the, yes. For Chapter 5.01, which is the Solid Waste Facility Regulation, we've gone through and and you'll see the list here, corrected certain cross-reference errors, changed the term citizens to residents, and we did that as part of the inclusive language. We felt that As you know, the term citizen can have a negative connotation, so we've updated that. We've changed plural terms to singular to improve regulatory clarity, and I'll just give you an example of what that means. This is regulatory code best practices. If you were to say the city will issue parking badges to all employees, it's not clear if they're going to get multiple badges. So you really should say the city will issue a parking pass to each employee. So we've gone through and changed that. We've removed the final zeros on dollar amounts for easier reading. You know, it's the little things that make all the difference, right? For easier reading. For example, instead of 300.00, it just goes to 300, and that tries to create consistency because we went back and forth in the old code chapter. We changed the term planning director to planning department when a local land use compatibility statement is required for a metro authorized facility. And all that did was codify our current practice in which we receive notification from a city or a county, but not an individual. And we removed redundant and unnecessary words that didn't change the underlying meaning. So those were the changes, high-level changes to the solid waste facility regulation chapter. Next slide. And now some overview of the solid waste flow control changes, which is in chapter 5.05. Again, changed the term citizens to residents, changed regional boundary to jurisdictional boundary to be more precise, removed redundant and unnecessary words, changed the phrase generated within metro to generated within the metro jurisdictional boundary so that we could be more precise. We capitalized the terms regional system fee and excise tax. And we changed the term administrative procedure to administrative rule, which is what we call them now, but they used to be called administrative procedures, and that wasn't always updated in the code. And so that's the high-level summary of chapter 5.05. Next slide. What this ordinance does not do. It does not change current policy, practice, or intent. And I gave this its own slide to highlight the housekeeping nature of these changes. You may recall when we brought the resolution to you last year for updating and plain and inclusive language, there was some concern among some counselors that if we weren't careful, a housekeeping change really could be a slight change in policy. And I just wanted to let you know that OMA and solid waste staff heard you loud and clear. We understand that concern. We recognize it. And so as we went through these changes, we really, really looked at those that are truly housekeeping. And I will tell you that there were a couple of examples in which we thought, yeah, we could tinker with this, but someone may argue that's a slight policy change. And so we said, no, forget it, get it out. We'll bring that to council later when it's more substantive. Because we really do want to honor that commitment to this council that these housekeeping updates should only be housekeeping updates. And with that, I'm finished with this presentation for this particular ordinance. If there are any questions.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. I just have one sort of trivial question. I noticed one of the changes, I was looking through that, and they're all very common, except the change from shall to will. And that always bothers me a little bit because will seems to imply foreknowledge, which we don't have. Shall implies directiveness. And so can you give me the thoughts on why we changed shall to will?
So shall gets changed, this is one of my, this is a hobby horse of mine, by the way, so it's plain language. Shall is one of the most heavily litigated words that we use in regulatory code writing because shall can mean, depending on the context, will, must, or may. And so it really, Councilor Rosenthal, it depends on the context. Sometimes will implies that there's something that happens that precedes it. If it rains, I will get an umbrella instead of I shall. If you're talking about a directive, they always should do this, it's a must. If there's some discretion, it's a may. And so I know this may sound nuanced, and the state legislature tends to use shall still. I find that that's being used less and less in government writing when it's especially regulatory because of the confusion it can create. So when it's either will, must, or may, it kind of depends on the context, but historically shall has been used for all three of those, and that's why it's litigated. It's not always clear. Does that help answer?
It does help answer. So we can't use must in these things, or we're directing them in some cases. They are required, maybe the words are required to, would be appropriate.
We can use must, and we do for the most part. And there are times when we use may and will. But you're right, must is the more common in this regulatory code environment. So
Okay.
generally, it's gonna be must. And what we found when we were doing this update is that we hadn't caught a couple of these shalls. I've had the good fortune of being here long enough now to have written a lot of this code and updated a lot of these code in Title V, and you don't find shalls very often, but we caught one, and we wanted to get rid of it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
No worries. Any other questions from any of the council members that are not here?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Oh, Counselor Nolan said it's very exciting. I'm actually excited. I'm actually going to use privilege to do a quick follow-up, and then Counselor Gonzalez has a question. So with regard to the conversation we just had, that's something that at the legislative level, there is a style guide that explains some of that nuance. Do we have a style guide in your office, and is that published for public to see, or is it internal use only?
Metro has a communications style guide the communications department has put out. Also, when council adopted the plain and inclusive language resolution last year, there is a policy that goes with that talks about how to write in plain language when you're doing code drafting. And it discusses the shall and the reason why we would change that. So there is a policy, it is public, if anyone wants to look at it. It was attached to the resolution last December.
Great.
And also, as you mentioned, the state has its own style guide for its legislative writing as well.
Just very intrigued to go read about shall sometime when I'm
Shalls.
having a little insomnia. Counselor Gonzalez.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for bringing this to us. And if it's really been almost a year since we talked about the plain English, conversation, then time has been flying, and that's a little bit scary, frankly. But more than anything, I feel a lot of joy in seeing these small changes just in the code. It's kind of a little nerdy, but it's great. In particular, I do want to thank you and acknowledge the hard work of the team to change the term from citizen to resident. Like it's a huge issue in my community, just the small impact of the nuance of words and semantics and all that. And I think that the change reflects all of the users, and it reflects our community, I think, a little bit better. So I just appreciate that. I don't think that I am grateful enough, or I explain my gratitude enough when I do see those kind of changes made intentionally, especially by institutions and people with power. So it's just really great. Thank you for bringing that to us. And it's a small change, but it's a significant change. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. Language evolves, we know this, and so we just need to, that's why we look at this code and we update it as things change and time moves on.
Thank you. So seeing no further questions, I'm going to move us along to conduct our public hearing, because I know there are many people watching anxious to raise their hand. So I'm going to open the public hearing on ordinance 23-1948. Connor, can you please describe for participants today procedures for a public hearing?
Yes, thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on ordinance number 23-1948, for the purpose of amending certain Metro Code chapters in Title V, Solid Waste for housekeeping updates and to incorporate plain language best practices, now is the time to do so. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. Once again, if you've not signed up to speak, you can do so now by raising your hand in Zoom, and that raise hand button should be at the bottom of your screen or within the Reactions tab. For anybody who wishes to testify, I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept a promotion to a panelist. Once you do that, you'll rejoin and be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And as a reminder, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, Deputy Council President Lewis, nobody has signed up in advance to testify on this item, and I don't see any hands going up in the audience.
Giving it a few seconds for any virtual participants. Seeing no comments, I'm going to close our public hearing. Our second reading and final council action is scheduled for October 19th, 2023. Moving on, I would like to consider together the following ordinances for one single public hearing. So together, we're going to contemplate item 4.2, which is ordinance number 23-1499 for the purpose of repealing Metro Code Chapter 2.05, procedure for contested cases, and replacing it with a new updated Metro Code Chapter contested case procedures. Item 4.3, ordinance 23-1500 for the purpose of repealing Metro Code Chapter 2.03 civil penalties and replacing it with a new Metro Code Chapter 2.03 civil penalties and amending certain Metro Code chapters to align with the new code Chapter 2.03. And then the third, item 4.4, ordinance number 23-1501 for the purpose of amending Metro Code Chapter 5.09 illegal disposal to align it with the new Metro Code Chapter 2.05 contested cases and incorporate plain language best practices. We still have Shane Abma, who is still our Metro senior attorney, and I will turn it over to you for presentation of these three together.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. So now we're going to talk about three other chapters: contested case chapter, the civil penalties chapter, and the illegal disposal code chapters, and some proposed updates to those chapters. Again, for the record, my name is Shane Abma, and I go by he and him pronouns. So this presentation, this brief presentation, will be on three ordinances. We're presenting on them combined because they kind of have a common theme there, and they are interrelated. And these are regarding proposed code changes to the civil penalties chapter, which is 2.03, the contested case procedures chapter, which is 2.05, and the illegal disposal chapter, which is in chapter 5.09. And I will note that the civil penalties chapter is an agency-wide chapter, so this is a agency-wide, same with contested case procedures, whereas the legal disposal chapter is in Title V and is primarily just going to involve solid waste. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, sorry, I'm going too fast. Next slide after that one as well. All right, now let's start by asking ourselves, what do these chapters govern? Civil penalties chapter prescribes, quote, the procedures and requirements for the notice, assessment, collection, and enforcement of civil penalties. And you'll see from the second bullet point that Metro can impose civil penalties for violations related to the zoo, parks and nature, ethics, taxes, and solid waste. That's under the current code. However, just to let you know that primarily the civil penalties chapter has been used for illegal solid waste disposal violations and then violations related to solid waste franchises and licenses. It's my understanding, however, that other departments are considering enhancing enforcement of their code chapters, maybe the zoo and parks and nature. And so this civil penalties chapter might be more frequently used in the future. Next slide. There is the contested cases chapter, which is 2.05. What does it govern? Well, it prescribes the procedures and requirements for notice and hearings when a party seeks a contested case. Now you're going to ask, well, what's a contested case? A contested case exists when a Metro decision affects individual legal rights, duties, or privileges of specific parties. And examples may include a Metro decision that in regards to a license, a franchise, a permit, or the imposition of civil penalties. So if Metro makes a decision in one of these areas and that affects the individual rights, a person can request a contested case to have that heard by an independent hearings officer. I will also let you know that the contested case chapter is rarely used, and I'm wondering whether that's because we just don't have a lot of penalties that we're imposing, or if because it is so cumbersome and difficult to use that people tried their best to ignore using it. I've been here for 8 years at Metro. It's never been used in my 8 years that I've been here. Were you getting ready to ask a question? Or okay.
No.
Next slide,
processing.
please. Okay, processing. Next slide. The illegal disposal chapter, which is 5.09, it governs illegal disposal prohibitions in the Metro area. We sometimes colloquially refer to this as illegal dumping. It prescribes Metro's illegal disposal citation requirements. So when someone does illegally dump, we actually have a citation that we issue that has quite prescribed details as to what needs to be in that citation. That chapter also authorizes civil penalties and the recovery of Metro's administrative cost for investigation or remediation of illegal dumping. And it currently has a hearings procedure for contesting these illegal disposal citations. One of the problems that we're going to talk about in a minute is that the hearings procedure in the illegal disposal chapter is completely different in many ways from the contested case hearings procedure, even though it really involves the same kind of activity and process. Next slide. So the next question that we have is, well, we know what they govern, why should council update these chapters? Let's talk first about the civil penalties and contested case chapters because they're kind of interrelated. First, they were both established in the late 1970s and they've virtually been unchanged since then. They were established by the former Metropolitan Service District Board of Directors. They were modeled on state law, primarily ORS Chapter 183, and that just doesn't work for local governments. And now, you could ask yourself, why were they modeled on state law? I can only surmise or guess that when we were first operating back in the 70s, we were a new agency. I think that some of the attorneys that were drafting this, or whomever was drafting it, they didn't want to start from scratch, so they just looked at state law. You already had chapters on civil penalties and contested cases, so they just kind of borrowed from them. But we found that they have been difficult to actually implement over the years. So we should update these chapters to remove procedures that are just impractical and difficult to implement. And next, we want to ensure consistency and coordination among the various Metro Code chapters that do impose civil penalties and authorize appeals for those penalties. And finally, we want to streamline and simplify the process for appealing these civil penalties and any other enforcement measures that we have. Any questions about the state law aspect of that? Okay. I'm just guessing as to why that was done. And I think that Metro at the time being such a unique government, it was trying to look as to which way it should go. Today, we generally more closely align with local government cities. So in fact, we attend the city attorneys conferences. So that's where we've kind of have moved over time and away from the state statutory schemes. As far as the illegal disposal chapter, why should we update that chapter? Well, as you know, there's been a significant increase in illegal disposal within the Metro region in the last few years. And from that, not surprisingly, we've had an increased number of citations and then an increased number of requests to appeal those citations and seek a hearing. The current code chapter language that we have, it references certain criminal state statutes that just really are not applicable to a local government administrative hearing like this. And we can talk about that more in a bit, but it talks about, it just replaces words like prosecutor with metro attorney, defendant with cited person. Some of these current hearing procedures are confusing and they're proving unworkable. The hearings officer that we have employed, the hearings officers, because we've had several, they find it confusing. They struggle with some of the language. And really, we should just make sure that we align our legal disposal chapter hearing process with that in the contested case and civil penalties chapters. They really should work together, and right now they're not. So that's why we should update some of these chapters. Next slide. And then finally, again, my hobby horse, we are required by this council to incorporate plain language best practices, and therefore we are doing a general review when we're updating a code chapter for any reason. We want to also just take that opportunity to look through it and see how we can improve the readability. And I won't go over this too much because we've already talked about it, but again, council does require that we use best practices for plain and inclusive language. And that resolution also required a scheduled review of Metro Code chapters for opportunities to update. Next slide, I mean. And now I want to just discuss a brief summary of the updates to these. And to be very clear, this contested case and the civil penalties chapters, these are repeal and replaces. They were so unworkable, so convoluted, so difficult that track changes would have been a nightmare for you to read, and it just seemed easier if we got rid of them and started over. So let's start with the contested case procedures chapter. And I'll again say that there is a more detailed list of these updates in the staff report, but I'm just going to highlight some of the big ones. First of all, we did our general plain language review and we removed the shalls, the passive voices, nominalizations, etc. We then clarified when a contested case exists. And I say that because a very broad reading of the way the current language is that arguably someone could say that any decision that Metro makes, any decision is subject to a contested case hearing. And that's really not the intent, and that's not the way it should work. So we've at least made clear that this doesn't apply to grants. So if we deny a grant, that's not a contested case decision. If there's a breach of contract, that's not a contested case decision. Or if this council passes a new law that is of general applicability that affects everyone or a class of facilities, a class of people, That's not a contested case because it's not a specific individual. It's not a permit or a violation or a permit decision. It's just a new law that applies to everyone. So that they don't get to do a contested. They can challenge that law, but not in a contested case proceeding. It also removes the Metro Council as a hearings body generally and specifically as the review body from a hearing officer's determination. And I want to tell you a few reasons why that is the case. First of all, this was modeled after state law, the current chapter that we have, and what the drafters did is they simply substituted the word state agency for Metro Council. And the state agency can be a department, a board. It's not uncommon for a hearings officer at the state level in a contested case to provide a proposed order to a state agency board to review. Sometimes those boards have certain expertise, sometimes not, but that's not uncommon. Here, it doesn't make as much sense for a hearings officer's determination to go to the Metro Council for review because state agencies and the Metro Council have very different roles and responsibilities. They're just not apples to apples to simply substitute those terms. Second, in the current language, it's not clear when it would go to council. So it says that someone requests to contest a case, they could go to a hearings officer or council. It doesn't say who makes that determination or why that would be or when it would happen. And third, council is not involved generally in the underlying evidentiary presentation. And so for something to go to council and then to have council make findings of fact and conclusions of law, which is what the current code says you can do, doesn't make sense if you haven't been there to receive the underlying evidence. So those are three reasons why it just doesn't really make sense for these contested cases to be reviewed by the Metro Council. The other change to this is to streamline, simplify, and clarify the procedures that the hearings officer will follow. The current language is pretty convoluted. Next, it removes personnel discharges from possible contested case hearings. We don't know why. Actually, I've asked around. We don't know why that's in there. It's not been used. I've asked HR attorneys and HR department, and I don't know why that's in there, but we don't do it as a matter of fact anyway, so that's removed. And then we created a new section called Hearings Officer Duties to clarify the hearings officer's role in these proceedings. Any questions before I move on to the civil pen? Yes.
One quick question. So there is no, in the contested cases, then the council no longer has a role in any cases?
That's the proposal. Of course, this council could choose not to adopt that, but I'll also say, some of you know that I served on the Milwaukee City Council, and the last thing I ever wanted was a fence dispute or something to come before me on the council, and so we tried to get rid of that. It's just not very common practice, with the exception of land use decisions, which do go to local government, to elected body reviews. It's just not really practical or common for these kind of code enforcements to go to a council, an elected body.
What is the process if there's a contested case and the hearing officer makes a ruling, and that ruling, is there a right of appeal? Yes, they can file a writ of review with the circuit court. So if they find that the hearings officer acted unconstitutionally or did not follow due process, so it has to be, it's elevated. It's not just, hey, you heard my case and you ruled against me and I'm really upset about it. You need to find that there was some sort of serious. That'll go to the court system?
Circuit court judge.
Okay.
And we make that clear in the update that that's how that process would be. And that's a pretty common path, by the way. That's not unusual.
Multnomah County or the county in which the infraction took place?
It would go to Multnomah County Circuit Court because there's a statute that says that appeals or hearings, the writs of review, I'm not sure if it says writs of review specifically, but because our regional government is administratively located in Multnomah County, it is just as we did our validation action and all of that, it always goes to Multnomah County Circuit Court.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Next slide. The updates to the civil penalties chapter, again, general plain language review. We updated some definitions to reflect the current meanings. Those definitions hadn't been touched in years and they weren't accurate. And we removed specific references to penalty amounts for violations of the zoo, solid waste, and parks and nature regulations, and we instead moved those to the appropriate section in those department code chapters. So for example, in the current civil penalties chapter, there's a couple of sections that say if you violate the zoo ordinance, you owe $500 or whatever. we felt that it made more sense to put that in the zoo chapter. So you're reading the zoo chapter, and then it says, if you violate this chapter, here's your penalty amount. But the process itself will still be in the civil penalties chapter. It's just these specific amounts removed to the code, to the codes that match the parks and zoo. And so we didn't do a lot with the civil penalties chapter. We just cleaned it up a little bit, made it easier to read, broke some sections up. There wasn't a lot of touching to that chapter as much, though. Next slide. Updates to the illegal disposal chapter. Again, general plain language review. We're going to do that on all of these moving forward. That's just going to be the process. Next bullet, we removed cumbersome, unworkable appeal hearings procedures. I've talked a little bit about that. That the illegal disposal chapter had its own hearings procedure. I don't know why. And now we have referred it to this really nice, crisp, clean, updated contested case chapter hearing procedure. So now we don't have two separate kinds of procedures. We just have the one. And this should be more streamlined and workable. We removed unnecessary upfront cost burdens on cited individuals. The current code says that if you want to appeal this and you get an illegal dumping citation, you have to put the money up front, you have to pay the fine, and then you can appeal it, and then we'll refund it. And we just didn't think that was fair. You should have your day in court first and then determine. So we removed that unnecessary upfront cost. We aligned the appeal notice requirements for the same as those with contested case and civil penalties. In other words, just to summarize that, we basically said if you're going to appeal, you have to at least write a statement down as to what we did wrong. What's wrong with what we said? Instead of just saying, I don't like it, I want to appeal it. And we removed the references to state criminal law for pre-hearing discovery, which just were proving unworkable. And as I said, whoever drafted this originally just substituted prosecutor for metro attorney and defendant for cited individual. And I think that some of these pre-hearing discovery, they talk about having to give them the police report, et cetera. We don't have police reports. We don't have that. So we couldn't do it. We just couldn't comply with what it said. And then we aligned the evidentiary rules with those for Metro's new contested case procedures so that the evidence that you would submit is the same, whether it's illegal disposal or the rules are the same for that, or a violation of your solid waste franchise or your permit. And with, next slide. And with that, that's just a high-level summary of the changes. Again, repeal and replace 2 chapters and substantially improve the illegal disposal chapter, but that's not a repeal and replace. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Great, thank you so much. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Lewis. Just I appreciate this. It sounds like a real cleanup and something that was overdue in many regards, particularly some of the criminal things and the pre-cost items. Do you have any idea of how many illegal disposal citations? I assume RID Patrol does this on a fairly regular basis. How many citations they visited and what percentage of those are then appealed?
I don't exactly. Hyla Ritter in our solid waste department would know. I do know that just in the past, I think maybe 4 months, we've had 2 that have been appealed to the hearings officer. So I've been involved in those. So I know at least 2 have gone to a hearings officer just in the past 4 months. But as you know, with the pandemic and with us not being able to be out in the field for a while, there was a lot more illegal dumping, and we're catching up. You know this because you've heard these presentations. And so a lot more citations were issued, and then we're getting more and more requests for appeals of those citations. I don't know the answers, though, for specific numbers, Councilor Rosenthal.
I'll check with RID Patrol. Thank you.
And I also want to say that this was the highlight of some of the more prominent or the bigger changes, but the staff report lists them all in more detail if you had any questions about them in the staff report. I didn't go over every single change.
Councilors, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I am going to move us into public hearing. I'm going to open public hearing on ordinances 23-1499, 23-1500, and 23-1501. Connor, can you please describe to participants our procedures for public hearing?
Yes, thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on ordinances number 23-1499, 23-1500, or 23-1501, now is the time to do so. Once again, public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you have not already signed up to speak, you can do so now, either by raising your hand or filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room. For those joining on Zoom, I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept the promotion to a panelist. Once you do so, you'll be able to rejoin and turn on your camera and unmute yourself. As a reminder to everybody speaking today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, Deputy Council President Lewis, councilors, we have not had anybody sign up in advance to speak on this item. And I don't see any hands going up on Zoom or in our physical audience.
I join you in not seeing any hands. Giving it another second though, in case an online participant. Okay. I see no more comments. I'm going to close the public hearing, and our second reading and final council legislative action on these ordinances is scheduled for October 19th, 2023. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, council.
Can I just make a comment? I want to thank you for making a very clear presentation of these changes. It was very helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. With that, I'm going to move us to our end agenda items. And today we have with us Chief Deputy, no, somebody didn't write the script right. You are our Deputy Chief Operating Officer. Correct. And you are not Marisa Madrigal, you're Holly Calhoun. Correct. And we are so delighted to have you here today. And I know that you're super busy in this role that's still relatively new. So please give us your COO update today.
Thank you so much for having me. Just a couple high-level updates. First, wanted to keep you updated on the corrective action plan that we issued to Multnomah County for FY23 underspend. Yesterday, we had our first meeting to review status. We are currently looking at a fiscal report and have a little bit of follow-up, and we'll be sending you a more formal update, but just wanted you to be aware that we have initially kicked off the assessment process of that action plan. Second update is looking internally, zooming in for a moment. As you know, we do an employee engagement survey every couple of years. We just got our results back from that, and so we will be setting agency-wide priorities and department-specific action plans, starting with our directors next week. And we can provide some high-level findings on those themes, but just starting to work on the priorities for that. And then lastly, just a couple committee updates for you. Our Expo Future Governance Committees just started meeting, and the Sports and Financial Feasibility Study has started. So more to come, but exciting to see that work kick off. Our Committee on Racial Equity has 3 vacant spots right now, and they are doing a short recruitment right now to fill those vacancies. And then lastly, we just kicked off a new committee called the Accessibility Advisory Committee. It's an external body that will really help guide Metro on our practices that most affect people with disabilities. So that's just a newly formed committee. And those are my updates.
Wonderful. Thank you for those updates. Counselors, I'm going to move us into counselor communication. Any updates? No, ma'am. Okay. Counselor Simpson, got anything for us? Thank you for staying home and not sharing your germs. Good to see your face.
Right. I will say COVID is still alive and doing its thing. So if you're in a crowded space, wear a mask.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, I see no further discussion. I'm going to adjourn our meeting and remind everyone we will be together for our next regular meeting Tuesday, October 10th, 10:30 a.m. Thank you. Have a great day.
Well done.